The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. That's from Robert Swan, the explorer and environmentalist. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Today we're taking a really vital look at a crisis that's, well, it's intensifying rapidly but often stays just below the radar: climate-induced displacement. We're drawing our insights from a recent piece in the Indian Express, which makes this a pretty crucial discussion for anyone aiming to be well-informed. Especially, if you're grappling with complex topics for exams like the UPSC, or maybe just want to deepen your understanding of these global challenges.
That's absolutely right. Our goal today really is to cut through some of the ambiguity, the confusion that surrounds those often called climate refugees. It's a term we hear a lot, but maybe not accurately. We'll look into the significant gaps in their protection, examine the sort of fragmented global and regional responses, and try to understand why this growing human tragedy demands such urgent attention. Conceptually, yes, but also legally. This deep dive should give you that nuanced perspective you need on a topic that's, frankly, immensely relevant right now.
Okay, so while global attention is understandably focused on very visible human tragedies, think Ukraine, Gaza, our source highlights this other crisis quietly brewing: displacement driven by a planet undergoing, well, pretty rapid ecological shifts, and the scale is sobering. The World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, documented over 600 extreme weather incidents in 2024, just in 2024, including 148 events they called unprecedented and nearly 300 described as unusual.
Now, those numbers are stark.
They are. And the impact: 1,700 fatalities, 824,000 people displaced. And looking ahead, projections from the Ecological Threat Register warn that by 2050, 141 countries might face at least one major natural disaster, potentially affecting 200 million people. That's unprecedented human mobility. So when we talk about these numbers, these people, who exactly are they, and why is it so hard to define them?
That really is the fundamental question, isn't it? And it's right there where the ambiguity starts. The term climate refugees itself, it's widely used in public discussion, but it remains really imprecise. There's just no uniformly agreed upon definition in international law. For instance, the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, a key body, they actually avoid using the label climate refugee.
Oh, interesting. What do they use instead?
They prefer something like persons displaced due to climate change and disasters. They see that is more accurate. And this lack of a single term has led to, well, a whole bunch of different phrases being used interchangeably. Things like environmentally displaced migrants, climate migrants, disaster-displaced migrants. You hear them all.
It seems like a massive hurdle right at the start. If you can't even agree on who you're talking about, what makes defining these individuals so much harder than, say, other displaced groups?
Well, what's fascinating and also incredibly complex is the way environmental factors intertwine with everything else. Economic drivers, social issues, political factors, poverty, disease, poor governance, even conflict sometimes. They all link together. This makes it almost impossible to say displacement is solely because of climate change.
Ah, I see. It's never just one thing.
Exactly. That complexity makes crafting one precise definition incredibly challenging. Another key difference often involves crossing borders. That's quite common for people displaced by climate impacts. Whereas many other displaced groups might be internally displaced, they flee their homes, yes, but stay within their own country.
Okay, so this definitional problem logically leads to their legal vulnerability, right? What does this ambiguity actually mean for their protection under international law? Do they have any protection, or are they basically falling through the cracks?
That's precisely the issue. Unlike traditional refugees, people fleeing persecution or state failure, those displaced by climate factors largely fall into this gray area. The main international agreements, the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 Protocol, they govern refugee protection globally.
Right.
But both have quite a restrictive definition of who counts as a refugee. They focus on displacement due to persecution, war, civil unrest, conflict. But they explicitly do not recognize environmental causes or climate disasters as valid grounds for formal refugee status.
And our source highlighted a really stark example of this, didn't it? The case of Ione Taitiota from Kiribati. He applied for asylum in New Zealand, arguing rising sea levels were making his home uninhabitable, but his claim was rejected. Why?
Exactly, a pivotal case. The court essentially said the 1951 convention requires a, quote, well-founded fear of persecution or political violence. And unfortunately, climate-induced environmental change just doesn't fit that criteria.
So no persecution, no refugee status.
Pretty much. unless their displacement somehow overlaps with recognized persecution, maybe conflict over scarce resources. For instance, people fleeing climate disasters generally don't get formal legal protection under that convention. And what makes it even trickier is that often the state itself is a victim of the disaster.
Right. The state's capacity is overwhelmed.
Exactly. Disasters deplete resources, damage infrastructure,
Mhm.
making the state unable, even if willing, to protect its own people adequately. Also, unlike traditional refugee situations which can be prolonged, indefinite, climate displacement varies. It could be temporary, like moving after a flood, or permanent if land is lost to sea level rise. Sometimes movement might even be pre-planned, which blurs the lines between voluntary migration and forced displacement.
It really sounds like this legal gap hits certain groups much harder than others. Our source points strongly towards the global south. Why is that the case?
Yes, if you look at the bigger picture, the vast majority of people displaced by environmental change are from the global south. And there are clear reasons. Increased dependence on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture, plus limited capacity to adapt to the changes, it makes them much more vulnerable.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Look at Central America's dry corridor. Prolonged droughts, then successive hurricanes since 2016. It drove nearly 1.4 million indigenous youth, mostly farmers, to need aid. Many had to try and cross borders, often towards the U.S. or the Sahel region in Africa. Advancing desertification coupled with armed conflicts, it displaced over 2 million Burkinabe by early 2025. Brazil's northeast saw about 2.5 million flood-related displacements between 2008 and 2022. It shows how cycles of drought and extreme rain force people to move again and again.
And what about the places we often think of first, those low-lying island nations, like Kiribati, Tuvalu?
Yes, they are absolutely on the front line. An existential threat, really. Nations like Kiribati and Tuvalu might need over $10 billion just for coastal defenses by mid-century, just to protect land and let communities stay put.
$10 billion just for defenses.
And consider coastal Bangladesh. Projections suggest by 2050, maybe 17% of the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta could be underwater,
17%.
jeopardizing homes and livelihoods for up to 20 million people. Their movement into neighboring India has already created one of the world's largest migration corridors.
Wow.
And it's interesting, you mentioned the Tachiote case earlier.
Yeah.
Contrast that with the Tuvaluan family around the same time. They faced similar sea level threats. They were granted permanent residency in New Zealand. But crucially, it was on discretionary humanitarian grounds.
Not as refugees.
No. It was mainly due to existing family ties there. It wasn't under any formal refugee mechanism, and that really highlights this reliance on ad hoc solutions, case-by-case decisions, rather than a clear, reliable legal framework. It's precarious.
So, given this huge legal gap, what attempts have been made? Our source mentions soft law instruments. What are those exactly? Are they effective at all?
Right, soft law. In the absence of a binding international treaty specifically for climate displacement, these soft law instruments have become important avenues. Think of them more as guidelines, recommendations, frameworks for cooperation rather than hard enforceable law.
Okay, so not legally binding.
Correct. Take the Nansen Initiative, started in 2012, and its successor, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, or PDD. They developed an agenda to protect cross-border displaced people in disaster climate change contexts. Over 100 states endorsed it in 2015, and they offered some innovative ideas, things like humanitarian visas, regional relocation frameworks, but they lack legal teeth. It all relies on voluntary state participation.
So good ideas, but states don't have to follow them. What about bigger global agreements? Do they even acknowledge the problem?
They do, to some extent. Instruments like the Global Compact on Refugees from 2018 and the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, the GCM, they both acknowledge climate change as a significant driver of displacement.
But again, non-binding.
Exactly. They focus on cooperation and dialogue, not creating enforceable obligations. Because of this gap at the international level, regional efforts have actually gained more prominence. For example, the Kampala Convention in Africa. It specifically addresses internal displacement from natural disasters, creating regional duties for states that signed up.
Ah, okay. So some regional progress.
Yes, and in the Pacific, you have frameworks like the Pacific Islands Framework for Action on Climate Change, PFCCC, and various free movement agreements. They promote cooperation within the region, though again, their scope is mostly limited to citizens within that specific region.
It still sounds quite fragmented. Despite all these challenges, are there any maybe glimmers of hope, any recent legal shifts that suggest a change in perspective?
Well, this is where some recent developments in jurisprudence get quite interesting and potentially significant. There was a ruling by the UN Human Rights Committee in 2020. It set a really critical precedent. It basically said it's unlawful under international human rights law to forcibly return individuals to places where climate impacts pose a severe threat,
Unlawful based on what?
based on the fundamental right to life, which is articulated in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR.
Ah, using existing human rights law.
Exactly. By grounding the reasoning there, the ruling suggests potential pathways, ways to integrate climate displacement within existing human rights frameworks. It's not a dedicated climate refugee treaty, but it could be a really important step forward, offering a different legal angle for protection.
Okay, so we have these complex definitions, these legal gaps, these fragmented solutions. What's the big takeaway? What's the urgent call to action for the world? How do we move forward?
Look, there's an urgent need, really, for the global community to collectively, well, recalibrate how we assess risk. And we need to redesign our climate adaptation and mitigation strategies so that displacement is absolutely central to them.
Not just an afterthought.
Precisely. Because without that shift, even well-meaning solutions building seawalls, creating green buffer zones, upgrading coastal infrastructure, they risk causing what source calls climate gentrification.
Climate gentrification, how does that work?
Well, these improvements can drive up living costs, pushing out low-income communities. So ironically, you end up displacing people because of the climate adaptation efforts. You create more climate refugees.
That's a really stark warning. The source distills this whole mess down to a triple gap, which seems quite useful. Can you unpack that for us?
Yes, the triple gap really gets to the heart of the dilemma. First, there's a conceptual gap. How do we even define these individuals clearly? Second, a legal gap. How do we recognize them formally under international law? And third, a policy gap. How do we actually protect them effectively on the ground? Addressing this silent but deepening crisis, it demands a dual focus. We have to uphold human rights, absolutely. But we also need to consider the legitimate security concerns of states. But fundamentally, unless we urgently bridge this triple gap, conceptual, legal, policy, millions of people will continue to live and move in a state of legal invisibility, unseen, unprotected by the very systems meant to safeguard human dignity.
What a complex picture. This deep dive really underscores that climate displacement isn't just an environmental story. It's fundamentally about human rights, international law, and frankly, our collective global responsibility. As you reflect on this, and especially for those of you listening who might be preparing for the UPSC exam, it's worth considering. How do we ensure the dignity and rights of these millions, currently unseen, are finally recognized? What role can genuine international cooperation, innovative policy, actually play in turning this legal invisibility into real human security?
It's a topic that demands ongoing critical thought, definitely. We hope this discussion has provided a clearer understanding and maybe, sparked some further questions for your own research and thinking.
Absolutely. If you found this deep dive valuable, maybe for your UPSC prep or just for understanding the world better, please do hit that like button. Subscribe for more in-depth discussions on critical issues like this one. And please leave us a comment. Any further queries, thoughts you have, we'd love to hear them. Your engagement really helps us keep these important conversations going. Thank you so much for joining us.